Hello everyone, and welcome back to Chapter 10 of The Bone Witch by Rin Chupeco. Please excuse the glare that is happening in the top corner of this video. I had to switch stands due to needing to charge my phone. So there's going to be some shadow from the light that is on this stand. We'll be starting on page 114 of the paperback version of The Bone Witch, and we are in chapter 10. It was dawn when I awoke, judging from the light trailing in from the window. For several moments I was confused, because the falling leaf had small oblong frames that look out into their center garden, while this had a view of the oracle's temple, pale smoke still rising from somewhere underneath its polished dome roof. Lady Michaela stood before the glass pane, one hand lifted to brush back a curtain. She was staring at something in the distance. "Do you know of King Randral the Quiet?" she asked without turning around. "I think so." My head felt better, the unwanted pressure gone. I had read about him in one of Lady Michaela's books. He ruled Odelia during the Plant North dynasty, but disappeared during the 83rd naming day celebrations. What happened to him has always been a mystery. He disappeared during his trip to Coin. This is a very important detail because the history books will need rewriting. King Randral the Quiet briefly rose from the dead. Whoever his assassins were is not certain, but we now know they buried him underneath falling leaves, whose gardens of flowers have greatly benefited from his royal compost ever since. Randall had a very prominent nose, mind, and they were still able to identify the king from the impressive amount of flesh and muscle you brought back along with him. Sorry about that. That was my daughter. She was coming in to sit down next to me. Hold on. Sit up. Let me scoot over a little bit. There you go. I shot out of bed, fear gripping my insides. The colony of rats, the grinny skeleton that had broken through the floor, then the inexplicable pain I felt that cut at me like knives, the unexpected release and relief, the sudden weakness that followed, and then remembering nothing after that. King Randral the Quiet proved the lie to his name, Lady Michaela continued sincerely. For a corpse, he was quite empathetic. He declared that the then crown prince was not his son at all, but came from a result of his wife's liaison with General Bosman, the commander of his army. And if there's one thing constant about the dead, it is that they cannot lie. It would seem that King Telemaine cannot claim to be a descendant after all, though his son still shares the man's lineage from his mother's side of the family, centuries of royal intermarriages being what they are. Did I? Lady Michaela turned to look at me, and I read the answer in her gaze. How many did I? King Randral and a little over half the Ankion cemetery. You also resurrected some dead rats, a dozen cats and dogs. I disrupted a funeral in progress. There was a small stampede when we realized the guest of honor was clawing his way out of his coffin, but fortunately no one was hurt much. You have a habit of interrupting burials, don't you? I gulped. When am I to be executed? Surprise bloomed on Michaela's face, and she actually laughed. Executed? Don't you worry your young head about that, child. No one shall be executing anybody. A term of imprisonment was more likely, but the good thing about being bone witches is that people fear to keep us even in castle dungeons. Prince Kantz and I convinced the Empress that it was an accident. Yes, Prince Kantz spoke on your behalf. So you have at least one ally in Odelia. You may be punished by the Asha Council, however, but they have no desire to expel you from the Willows. I trust this is to mean they are still interested in continuing your training, for the present at least. The long term effects can be far flung, but it is something we shall have to accept as unavoidable. Even as I speak, Fox is guarding the door outside, ready to defend your honor if necessary. Fox? He brought you here. We discourage people from loitering around the tea houses when they have no business there. But in the instance, I am glad he is quite a stubborn man. He senses you leaving the Valerian and thought to follow just in case. I'm sorry. I couldn't stop crying. Tears spilled from my eyes, dousing the sheets and blankets with salty rain. I hunched over, hiccuping, and Lady Michaela left her perch by the window to wrap her arms around me. It's called a seeing stone, she said softly, once the violence of my sobbing had adapted. It finds those with the strongest capacity for magic and amplifies their abilities at the cost of their strength. Draw far more than what you can handle, and there is a danger of burning yourself out, even fatally. It is particularly potent for Dark Asha, who by nature draw the strongest spells intently, which explains how it ignored the other Asha and drew on you. I found it hidden behind one of the stone pillars outside the room you sat in with Zoya and her friends. All unbound corpses should have fallen the instant you lost consciousness, but the seeking stone kept them sentient and moving, which is how I was able to guess its presence. It is not your fault, T. It seems that some people are not satisfied with despising us from afar. But why? The idea that I could have killed made me want to throw up again. What do they want? There are many reasons to despise us bone witches. It may be that they seek revenge against some other bone witch, or perhaps the one who conspired with the kingdom that cost them their own in ages past. Sometimes it can no more than listening to the tale of blade that soars and dancing wind to be inflamed by self-righteousness. More likely, it is a faceless who entered the willows undetected and sought to ferment discord. Antioch would be a good place to start for that, and few people can get their hands on one so rare as a seeking stone. We shall lay low for a while until people remember to forget again. So if this was their purpose, they have succeeded, for now. You need some time to recuperate from what the stone drained from you, and that means bed rest and no unnecessary work. Mother agrees with me. Excuse me. But whoever attacked me shall be dealt with at the first opportunity. Your health is more important than even that. But I feel so helpless. That is usually the rule when you are taken advantage of. You can be the most powerful witch in the land, but you will always have a weakness, and that will always make you believe you have no power with someone who exploits it. There is no greater strength than the ability to understand and accept your own flaws. Are we still welcomed in the palace? The Empress has always been a staunch ally of ours, and King Telemaine and I are old friends. We've known each other for a long time. We met back when he was still a skinny kid with a loud, squeaky voice. One of the princesses, Maeve, I think, said something about you. I didn't want to upset Michaela, but I felt I had an obligation to inform her of anyone who bore a grudge, in light of everything. She said that you don't have a heart because you've given it away, and that King Telemaine only allows you here to honor his brother's memory. For several seconds, Lady Michaela remained immobile, smooth and alabaster as a stone against the morning light, and then she breathed again and resumed flesh and blood. I think you should know, she said. The more people you meet in the city, the greater the possibility of you learning of my past, and I would rather you hear it from my own lips, as much as it pains me, than from someone else. It would make myself to be a liar and a hypocrite otherwise, after all my talk of knowing your flaws to learn your strength. Michaela settled herself into a more comfortable position beside me on the bed. It happened when I was young, not as young as you, and surely old enough to know better. I tell you often not to give your heart away, because my own mentor taught me so, as did her teacher before her. It is a warning passed down from teacher to student, and one that I paid little heed to, for I broke the rules and gave mine away. I fell in love, you see. My face must have looked funny, for she smiled. Yes, sometimes it's that simple. Princess Maeve must have heard about it from her mother. Queen Leonoria rules the kingdom of Arian Kosha to the west, and she was my rival for his heart. I'm not surprised her daughter would inherit her hatred of me. It was Telemain's older brother, King Vanor. Her voice changed. It grew softer, a faint tremor in her usually striking words. Her eyes returned to the window, but they gazed at something further away. It didn't matter that I was a bone witch and he was a successor to the throne. He wanted to marry me, was willing to give up everything. His father threatened to disown him, which suited him just fine, but I refused. King Telemain is just an able ruler now, but he was only 16 years old then, too young to rule. Vanner was brilliant. He built schools for the poor and spearheaded roomberry farming as one of the king's chief exports. Odelia only had Morkwick's roomberry patch to go by, but he learned how to import roomberries the world over to package them into high-quality wine and spin the fibers into cloth good enough to rival Drox. I could not take him and his achievements away from the people. He refused to marry anyone else. That was his only stipulation to remaining on the throne. Did not stop his father from forbidding us to see each other, but it was too late. Vanner gave me his heart, and I gave him mine, like we were bound by marriage. But you know that you cannot give your heart's glass away unless you give your consent. But a bone witch needed her heart for her magic, or she would be much diminished. It didn't matter to me at the time that I had his heart, and that was the only thing I wanted. Michaela sighed, and the rising sun cast small shadows across her ageless face. I do not know what made him change. Perhaps he was beginning to realize that I was a millstone around his neck. But his relationship with me forever colored how other people judged him and made his state affairs all the more difficult. He began to pull away. It was the little things at first. He would put off days we planned on spending together, citing meetings and other unavoidable duties. I knew I was insufficient in comparison to his other royal responsibilities, and went along with his request until the day came when he stopped visiting altogether and refused to see me when I came. The heart that he had entrusted to my keeping began to fade over time. I watched it shrink, little by little, eaten up by the neglect and the worry and my tears, until one morning when there was nothing left. But my heart remained with him. Isn't it funny, these little ironies? He could take back his heart because he grew indifferent, but I could not take back mine because I loved him no matter what he did. He never used it to harm me. More likely, he tucked it away someplace he wouldn't need to see, and forgot about it in time. Even today, I still feel it grieving. And then he died. It was one of those little insecurities that cropped up from time to time in Odelia. Vanner's grandfather was too free with titles, and the consequences, there were too many nobles and too much greed for more land and property to go around than there actually was. He was ambushed on his way to meet the Emperor Undal of Daenerys to conclude a peace treaty. I never found my heart. The sadness can eat you up sometimes, remembering what could have been, what you should have done. Perhaps my presence would have averted the tragedy, and he would still be alive. But perhaps me being there would make no difference, because he had my heart and with most of my magic. We can endure any amount of sadness for the people we love. I have told you many things, T, but this is the most important of them all. Never give your heart glass away to anyone. Anyone else versed in magic can do you harm with it. People will never be what you make of them, but at least your own heart stays yours and true. And Michaela squeezed my hand. Her own was warm, with only a touch of an early frost. Think of it as a pet, she suggested, when it became clear that I would not grow accustomed to the Devea. It tried to lay its head on her lap like it was a puppy, though its snout was as large as all of hers. She stroked its rigid head, and it closed its eyes in bliss. It paid little attention to me, and I was thankful. With all due respect, mistress, few people would take the undead for a pet. And why not? They're not as bad as you think. They like to play. They do not attack unless they feel threatened. But stray too close to the lair, well, that's a different story. They only wish to be left alone. I share that much in common with them. Do you control them? I asked. The girl had found a rock as large as my hand, perfectly round and polished, smooth from the waves. It sailed through the air to land some distance away. The Devea let out a playful bark. Soon it was scampering across the sands in eager pursuit. Of course, she said. I know everything it feels. To a lesser extent, it knows everything I sense. That's how I know that it means no harm. It has a mind like a child's. But its grave was in Odelia, near Mirkwick. Where it lied buried is no longer of its importance. All it requires is a bezora and a spell-shifted heart glass. The bones of the dead creature on this beach are enough to suit my purpose. To bend and form into the Devea shape. It is easier to weave the spells this way, quicker than to start from nothing. It is no magic I have ever heard of before. It is not magic most Asha know, one that even the Faceless only recently discovered. Then why did you kill that first Devea the day I met you? I would not have been able to control it completely the way I can this Tavari. I must first build it up myself, with proper rituals, as I have done here. But why? Why are you raising it from the dead? Why won't you return it to its grave, like the other Devea you killed? The Tavari trotted proudly back to us with its prize. Its sharp teeth scored ridges against the sides of the rock. Its purr was strangely compelling. She smiled. Because Devea make for good armies. And that was the end of chapter 10. That wasn't too long. And now to start chapter 11. When Asha fight, they paint their faces, array themselves in jewels, and call it war. It's an old saying I found appropriate at the moment as I sat in Mistress Paramina's room and watched her prepare for the day, wishing I could disappear. I tried to curl up and make myself as small as I could, but knew it was only a matter of time before she directed her attention to me. I had no way of assessing the damage I had done when I raised the dead, because I had been exiled to a room I shared with Kana and Frahari for 4 days since that night. I was ordered to do the chores that didn't require me to leave the Valerium, and Kana and Frahari were commanded not to talk to me. I could sense Fox's presence close at hand, but because of the way the Ashika was built, even he could not find any other way inside to reach me. I felt miserable, certain that despite whatever Lady Michaela had promised, I would be seeing the inside of a dungeon soon enough. When Kana and Ferrari were told to bring me to Mistress Paramina's room, I was certain that time had come. The side glances that the Draco made through my way as we approached Mistress Paramina's room was accusatory and seemed to confirm my worst fears. Kana filled me in on what she could along the way. I'm all poked up with fright, Kana whispered, more excited than afraid. They've cleaned up the market, but the graveyard is in chaos. They said that you did it. You did it all, did you? I think so. Kana looked puzzled by that, but squeezed my arm comfortingly and hurried off of Ferrari. The old woman had dressed before summoning me, which I was grateful for. What I hadn't expected was the richness of the hua she wore. The length of its train took up nearly a quarter of the room. It was black in color. Stripes of red ceremonial incense paper folded into doves to symbolize auspiciousness were hand painted into the rich silk with meticulous with meticulous detail, and yellow coltsfoot flowers dotted the edges of her sleeves. Her waist wrap, excuse me, was magnificent to behold. It was made of pure golden silk, and with the embossed House Valerian symbols stitched in silver thread on its edges. A collection of creams, colored sticks, powders, and oils crowned Mistress Paramina's bedstand. I watched, curious in spite of myself at first, and then with slowly growing horror as she applied liberal doses of varied selections onto her face. Beige face cream against her sagging cheeks, dark ink on the edges of her eyelids, pink rouge on her cheekbones. Despite my misgivings, the magic in these ointments worked. The lines around her eyes decreased. Her face firmed up and lost a greater part of her excess skin. Mistress Paramina still looked old and crass and angry, and men were more likely to cross the street to avoid her than stop to admire. But now they might hesitate. She looked a little less forbidding, leaning towards 70 instead of 90 years old, which I thought was much of an improvement as was possible for her. Next, the old Asha opened a wardrobe beside her bed, revealing drawers filled to the brim with jewelry ornaments of every size, shape, and color. I believe anyone could live off the proceeds of such a collection, not only for the rest of her life, but also for the rest of her children's and grandchildren's. She selected a slim hairpin shaped like a heart and made of a solid gold, with a yellow and orange silk coltsfoot flower to match her hua, and twin hairpins with fluttered crepe paper and red coral. She took her time weaving them into her hair, her long white hair, and finally turned toward me. She looked, and I would be lying if I said she looked beautiful and enchanting, powerful. She had never seen anyone who had dripped energy and willpower and magic the way she did. Excuse me. So, she said, voice clipped, I suppose it is time for your punishment. Come with me. Hold the edges of my train, dirty or damage it in any way, and I shall take the money for its repair from selling your hide if need be. Confused, I followed her out, careful not to trip over the yards of cloth trailing in her wake. Kana had been lounging out in the garden, but quickly sprouted to her feet at the sound of our footsteps, and was furiously sweeping the entrance when we passed. The old woman paused to slip on her sandals, and the maid shot me a worried look. I could manage nothing more than a weak smile her way before Mistress Paramina picked up the pace. Walking swiftly forward like the rest of her clothes weighed no more than a small bag of feathers. Fox stood in front of the Ashika. The expression on his face never changed, but I thought I sensed a quick flare of relief from somewhere inside my head before he fell into step behind us, careful to keep his distance from the Asha in her yards-long robes. Mistress Paramina didn't acknowledge my brother, nor did she tell him to leave. We made an odd trio as we continued down the lane. The old woman was at the head of the line, with her head thrown back in cool arrogance, me trying to carry her voluminous train and walk at the same time, and Fox guarding the rear, favoriting his leg a little bit, but still looking every inch the soldier. Everyone around us must have had the same thought. They all did their best to get out of the old Asha's way. Maids took one look at the woman stomping down the road and bolted. Apprentices bowed so low to her that their foreheads nearly hit their knees, before they too went scurrying past. One Asha, strolling down the street in casual robes instead of a hoo-ha, was more confident in her manners. She gave Mistress Paramina a graceful curtsy, but I saw her shoulders slump down in relief once she was safely past. They paid no attention to the girl on the other end of Mistress Paramina's hoo-ha, and I was grateful for their inattention. If my last encounter with people and the Willows had told me anything, it was that I would much rather remain undetected in the shadows than saunter out in the light, with my flaws out for all to see. We turned into the street I had been on before. There were no buildings here other than a few rows of ancillary shops, each boasting beautiful and expensive-looking hua in their storefronts. A few apprentices gathered before a few of the boutiques, admiring the clothes on display. Mistress Paramina led me away from even these towards a smaller shop on the farther end of the street. Unlike the others, there was no hua for show. It looked like a private residence that had somehow gotten itself lost on the clothesmaker lane. Mistress Paramina didn't knock. She simply marched up to the front door and slid it back with little ceremony. "I'm here," she announced. "Rahim, where are you, you old rascal? Rahim?" I found myself standing in the messiest, most disorderly room I had ever been in, and I had seen the worst my own brother's room had to offer. Strips of fabric lay scattered in such heaps and piles that I could barely see what color the floor was. Bolts of cloth were propped against the walls, and people dressed in white are rushing back and forth carrying more. Despite their air of diligence, they all stopped to bow low to Mistress Paramina before they hurried on, and somehow still managed to jostle onto me as they did. Fox sidestepped them with little effort, and I looked around with interest. "Paramina!" It wasn't a voice, it was a roar that could have rattled glass, though none of the people running around so much had blinked. The largest and hairiest man I have ever seen in my life stepped into view. He was so tall that the top of his hair grazed the ceiling. His arms looked as if a brown bear had mated with the funniest carpet in the land and produced twins. I could barely see his face, for his beard started somewhere near his eyebrows and ended at a carefully trimmed point several inches away from his chin. At the center of his chest he wore a thick, knee-length jacket made of bright silver silk, and several gold rings bearing different cuts of diamonds on his fingers. His curly hair was pulled back from his face in a long ponytail, and his right ear was pierced with a crystal stud. In contrast, his heart's glass was unadorned and purple-hued. "Ah, Paramichka, how good to see you." He reached us in the 3 long strides and scooped Mistress Paramina up in his arms, swinging her around. It was a difficult feat, but the men and the women around us simply ducked out of the way. I didn't know if I was allowed to drop the Ashera's tray, but decided at the last minute not to. When the man snatched the old woman up, he nearly jerked my arms off its sockets. "Ah, what should I do for you? I see you wear my most elaborate of hua today. Do you wish another, more dragonesque for you? More gold?" I feared Mistress Paramina would slap him, and was shocked when she threw her head back and laughed. "Put me down, you large buffoon. I have not come here to add to my collection. My Malaya, I have come here to help this wretchling start hers." The man she called Rahim set her down, his attention now riveted on me. "Ah, is this your new Chinika? Is she the little novice I've heard so much about, raising the corpses and causing damage to the falling leaf?" "Ah," he clucked his tongue, a strangely matronly sound coming from someone who looked anything but. "But she is strong, ya. I can tell that much. As dark as an Asha can be. You will be my latest challenge, little Uniki. Your mother, Paramichka, will thank me for performing yet another miracle on the Valerian. Agata, Paviel." A boy and girl disengaged themselves from the rest of the people bustling about and hurried forward. The girl held a piece of parchment and a small quill, while the boy moved toward me, holding a curled piece of measuring tape. You will stay there and not move for the better part of an hour until I'm done with you, Rahim instructed me. Stretch out your arms on either side of your body like so. I obeyed dumbly. I thought I was on my way to be punished, not to be measured for what? Mistress Paramina, I said weakly. Silence, girl. The old woman kicked away a pile of doublets on a chair and settled herself comfortably on it. On cue, two more assistants appeared beside her. One carried an elegant crystal goblet with wine, and the other a footstool and a pile of cushions. The old Asha lifted her feet, and the girl slid the footstool underneath them with practiced skill. Fox quietly retreated from the whirlwind of activity that was starting up around me, moving instead toward one of the tables laden with rough sketches of motifs and patterns. You will only speak when spoken to. Do you understand me? She gave no indication that she was going to explain any further, so I said nothing. Only listened in a kind of daze while Rahim continued his one-sided conversation. He prowled around me, eyeing me in a way a tiger might eye a young deer, while Agata took various notes and Pavel measured me from all angles with his tape. There's some promise in you, you little Uchiniki. Skin between beige and barley, midnight eyes, gold for accents only then, but you wrap yourself around as much silver as you would want and still shine. Pavel, under her arms and 3 inches below her bust. The measuring tape dipped down to comply. 34 Duinumovo, 2 3/4. How do you like this Sherwini little girl? Excuse me? I was losing track of what he was talking to me, to his assistants or to himself. I said, how do you like the Sherwini? Rahim tapped at the long coat he wore. Popular for the men in coin, but not for the men of Terrace. Adgate, take note, 18 inches down and across, 3.5 in the waist. In Terrace, the men wear fur, but not in the fashionable ways. We kill the bears, the possums, the beavers, and then we stick them on the heads like so, he gestured, boring and unappealing. So I move here to coin, where the clothes have shape and the hats do not stare back. And your mistress, she has the heart of gold and took pity on a little downtrodden boy from the cold north. I started my shop with her support, and now we flourish. We flourish very much. Rahim Arkian is now the best word in Hua. I think the correct phrase would be the last word in Hua, Fox murmured. Rahim frowned. No, we are the best word. I would prefer death than being last. Agate, 14 inches, 12 on each side. Don't move, little Unichiki. I must see how big your breasts are. I turned bright red and instinctively tried to cover myself. No. We are all girls here. He laughed uproariously at his own joke, and then large, burly hands enveloped to my smaller ones, holding me still. Except this handsome brother, of course. Pavel lined it up a centimeter to the right. We must accentuate her form like so. Yes, Agata. 21, 27, 22. Well, Rahim, Mistress Paramina spoke up. Very nice, Paramichka. She has a nice form and will do very well in silks, long legs and a high waist. Small or large, her breasts will be works of art in my gowns. I blushed harder. No one paid me any attention. But not the dark gold for this one, no. No oranges or peaches or brown leaves. I shall know a day you hate me. It is the same day you will let her wear all shades of pink, Paramichka. The embers are already in her skin in abundance, and she will have no need of their colors in her hua. The taste for bright gold etchings, maybe. But mostly blues and greens and grays for this one. Do not touch that boy. Fox, who was in the middle of reaching for one of the sketches in the work table, paused. They're spell holders, boy. A little smudge and they can go. Rumley's beefy hands began to raise, but then lowered again. Well, they will be hard to remake. I will require a dozen official hua for her, my lady. 2 of each color you think best for her, and then half a dozen more in every kingdom style to start. A dozen official hua, I echoed. Rahim looked kindly down at me. You still do not know, little Uniki. You are to debut as an apprentice in 2 months' time, and it will not do to have no collection of your own. It would not be seeming to borrow one from another, Asha, for I might believe my Paramichi thinks cheaply of you. I stared dumbfounded back at Mistress Paramina. We shall need to leave in an hour's time, Rahim, milady, Malaya. We have an appointment with Cheshis. Rahim beamed. Excellent. She will pair her zahirs nicely with Mahua. Agatha, take down the blue swatches from the inner room and bring them here. Pavel, take the green and purple from the Annabelle. He spun me around like I was a wooden ballerina doll, and deftly wrapped my waist around a bolt of silver cloth before I had time to react. See there, little apprentice, you look lovely in silver. I stared at the mirror at my image with the beautiful and expensive fabrics wrapped around me. I am not going to be punished, I thought numbly, or is being an usher apprentice to be my punishment? And the purple drapes nearly here. Rahim thrust a piece of paper under my nose. It was a rough but stunning sketch of a purple and bright gold sunset overlooking a gray sky. It had been saving this up for a special occasion, and you will be it. We will show you to the world in this 2 months from now. Isn't that lovely? Now where are my girls with the cloths? Agatha. Pavel, you there. You look like you have the nice muscles for carrying. Come with me. He bustled off, dragging a confused fox with him. I looked away from the mirror and met Mistress Paramina's steady gaze. Yes, T, she said calmly. I could have punished you and turned you out with nothing but the clothes on your back and your tail between your legs. You have caused more chaos among the Ashika than it has seen in my lifetime. But there is a very long time indeed. But if there is one thing I'll forgive for the mess you have made, no matter how indirectly your responsibility in it lies, is that you are the strongest Asha I have seen in recent times, and when I will not have you lose on the population outside these walls, where you are likely to wreak even more havoc. You are strong in the dark. I think that is punishment enough, as you will learn in your own time. What matters now is that you must be taught as soon as possible, so the dark will not have the better of you. Michaela is rather fond of you, and I owe her that much at least. Do we understand each other, T? You made my life difficult, I said. The old woman burst into laughter again. If you think running errands and doing chores are difficult, child, then you are not ready to be an Asha. But for all the indigencies I heaped on you, you have held your head and done what is expected of you, and after your accident, I no longer see any reason to delay. She drained the contents of her goblet. You must, of course, earn your keep well. You will have to pay back the cost of these hoo-ha after you make your debut, but it is the only proper thing to do. I am going to be an Asha. Yes, I said weakly as Rahim and Fox returned, armed to the teeth with fabrics. A huge man looked triumphant, and Fox resigned. It's only proper. It took me 2 days to grow accustomed to the monster that roamed outside. 2 days to be convinced that it would not come and eat me while I slept. The girl refused to answer any more questions about the beast's purpose, in between tales about her hints of war. I tossed and turned in my sleep. Every time I dreamed, I saw the blue moon looking down on me, blinding me with its brightness, and I woke up sweating. You're aware of the circumstances of my exile, she said to me while the Devea dozed outside, unaffected by the hot sun baking down overhead. You wouldn't have sought me out otherwise. I know that they accused you of conspiracy and of treason. They accused me of many things, of killing a king and an Asha, of being one of the faceless, of betraying the kingdoms, but I am only guilty of one of those. But it was wrong of them for them to believe you capable of these things. That is not quite true. I am more than capable, she smiled wearily. But the last time I tried to explain myself, I was cast out and banished for my troubles. I will let them sort out what I did and did not do when this is all over. My work is not yet complete. She showed me her collection of tiny bottles, all glass in different colors. It was a curious luxury, given her surroundings, but she disagreed. This is our beauty secret, she laughed, and picked up a small vial that held a red liquid. She pressed the tip of her finger against the opening and upended the bottle, so the liquid inside coated the skin that prevented more from spilling out. She dabbed her finger against the sides of her neck. I caught a whiff of jasmine and flowers. These are my potions, she explained, setting another bottle that contained a thick yellow concoction. The cheapest of these spells are sold in the market commons all around the world. The more expensive spells are those that cater to each specific individual, made to draw out their strengths and hide their weaknesses. I have a blunt personality, more likely to say what I mean instead of sparing someone's feelings. This will not temper my words, but it will help those who listen to me accept them as lesser offense. Of course, if one is strong in the magic themselves, this may not work on them, or one might wear another spell that cancels out this magic. I cannot put on too many of the stronger spells all at once, for they muddle together and make themselves ineffective. Choosing which spells to wear is like playing a game, except you are forced to decide your moves without knowing what your opponent might bring to the fight. She selected a color stick next and gently dabbed her cheekbones with it. This is more for me than for show, she admitted to me. It keeps my strength up. The rest she left on the table, and she drew a divider back to hide them once more from view. I don't wear them as much as I used to. Nowadays it's easier to face people as myself instead of looking through a mask. She looked around and added wearily, though the amount of visitors in the 3 months I have been here leaves something to be desired. She turned back to me, and the changes became apparent. She looked softer somehow, more graceful as she stood. Her dainty feet moved over the uneven ground, and she lifted the hem of her dress to step over the threshold that separated the cave from the rest of the sandy shore. The stained, muddied fabric only further highlighted to me the difference between who she once was and the sympathetic state she was in now. She walked with her head bowed, and I admired the way she carried herself. Even in exile, she remained dignified. It didn't feel right for her to be here, forced to keep up house in a nameless cave on a sea of skulls, bordering the edge of the world. It didn't feel right that she was forced to live on this lonely beach like a nomad. It didn't feel right for her so sad, and it angered me that so many misunderstood. The Tavari approached to lick at her hand, and a fog cleared from my mind. A rush of affinity I felt for her diminished. My sympathy remained, but it was no longer raked by the growing, passionate force that seized me when she first rose from her vanity table. But there's been another problem with these spells, she said. Achafari diminished its magics the way its Bazora does, and only the dark runes are most effective on it. That is why most rely on dark Asha to put it back in the ground. I stared at her. She only shrugged. You knew, still you were affected by the charms I wore. Now imagine the subtlety it may wreak on an unsuspecting world. And that was the end of chapter 11. Thank you for joining us as we read those 2 chapters. And join us in our next video as we continue reading from The Bone Witch by Rin Chupeco.